What if I told you that a single American aircraft carrier, armed with fewer than 90 planes, once stopped the largest army on Earth from rewriting history? In the summer of 1950, while the world's attention was fixed on the Korean Peninsula, the People's Liberation Army of China had quietly gathered more than 500,000 troops along the Fujian coast. Their goal was clear: launch the final invasion that would erase Taiwan from the map. Thousands of wooden junks were being fitted for a massive amphibious assault. Victory seemed inevitable, until radar screens aboard the USS Valley Forge lit up with new orders. The 7th Fleet, America's most powerful naval formation, was moving in. Within days, cruisers, destroyers, and jet fighters armed with rockets and bombs transformed the calm waters of the Taiwan Strait into the most dangerous flashpoint in Asia. Mao Zedong suddenly faced a nightmare scenario: wooden boats against carrier-based jet aircraft capable of covering 150 miles in minutes. In that instant, a single decision made in Washington changed the destiny of East Asia. This isn't just a Cold War story, it's the origin of the standoff that still defines the Pacific today, from the Taiwan Strait to the South China Sea. We'll break down the strategy, the firepower, and the political gambit that turned a civil war into a global chess match. So stay until the end. Every maneuver, every calculation, and every forgotten signal from that summer will make you see the modern Indo-Pacific in a completely different way. If you love deep military history, strategy, and real defense analysis, give this video a like, hit subscribe, and share it. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps me bring you more untold chapters of military history.
The summer heat over the Fujian coast was thick enough to blur the horizon, but through the haze, something enormous was taking shape. Hundreds of wooden junks and fishing boats, hastily refitted with rifles and mortars, rocked on the shallow tides. On the beaches, tens of thousands of soldiers from the People's Liberation Army stood waiting for orders. Their commanders believed the end was near, that within weeks, Taiwan would fall, and the last remnants of Chiang Kai-shek's forces would be wiped from history. But fate, as it often does in war, had other plans. From beyond the mist of the Pacific came the silhouettes of steel giants, the U.S. 7th Fleet. At its heart was the USS Valley Forge, a floating city bristling with jet fighters and bombers, escorted by destroyers and cruisers that had survived the brutal naval battles of World War II. To the soldiers on the Chinese coast, those shapes on the horizon must have looked like ghosts of a new age, machines that belonged to a different kind of war. I always find this moment haunting. Imagine standing there, a young Chinese conscript, staring at the sea, believing history is about to be made, only to watch it slip away in a storm of American radar pings and roaring jet engines. One side had courage in numbers, but the other had technology and timing. The balance of power was decided not by ideology, but by logistics, fuel, and the range of a carrier-based aircraft. It was here, in that narrow stretch of water, that the future of Asia was decided without a single shot fired. The United States had stepped in, not just to defend Taiwan, but to redraw the entire map of post-war Asia. And that decision, made in the heat of the Korean crisis, would ignite a new kind of Cold War, one fought not on ideology alone, but on steel, sea lanes, and strategy. In the next part, we'll go inside the White House during those critical 48 hours when President Truman changed the course of the Pacific forever. It's hard to imagine, but the future of the entire Pacific once hung on just 48 hours inside the White House. In late June of 1950, President Harry Truman was awoken before dawn with news that North Korean artillery had opened fire across the 38th parallel. Seoul was collapsing. Reports flooded in, bridges destroyed, South Korean troops retreating, civilians fleeing south.
To many in Washington, it felt like déjà vu, another dictatorship using force while the free world hesitated, just as it had in Europe a decade earlier. Inside the Oval Office, the air was thick with urgency. Secretary of State Dean Acheson, Joint Chiefs Chairman Omar Bradley, and General Douglas MacArthur all understood one thing. If Washington stood by again, America would lose not only Korea, but the credibility it had fought for in World War II. Truman listened in silence, then spoke words that would change Asia forever. We cannot let aggression go unanswered. Within hours, he signed two decisive orders. The first to send U.S. air and naval forces to support South Korea, the second, more unexpected, to neutralize the Taiwan Strait. The 7th Fleet would now patrol between China and Taiwan, preventing both sides from striking. It was a move as bold as it was brilliant. On paper, it looked like neutrality. In reality, it was containment. Truman had turned an Asian civil war into a front line of the global Cold War. I've always thought this was one of Truman's sharpest strategic instincts. He saw the pattern before anyone else, that Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang were parts of the same test. If one domino fell, the rest would follow, and he was determined that the next domino would not be Taiwan. Those 2 days in June weren't just about defending an island. They marked the birth of America's Pacific strategy, one that still shapes every U.S. carrier patrol and alliance today. Because of those 48 hours, the Taiwan Strait became more than a body of water. It became a boundary between two worlds. Next, we'll step aboard the steel deck of the USS Valley Forge and see what made the 7th Fleet the most formidable force on Earth.
When the order came, the USS Valley Forge was docked peacefully in Hong Kong, its crew enjoying a rare moment of rest after long Pacific patrols. But within hours, calm turned to chaos. Alarms blared across the decks, supply trucks raced along the pier, and sailors rushed aboard carrying crates of bombs and jet fuel. The mighty 7th Fleet was coming alive. By the time the sun rose, the Valley Forge, a floating fortress of steel, was leading a task force of cruisers and destroyers straight toward the Taiwan Strait. To understand the shock this caused in Beijing, you have to picture what the 7th Fleet really was. The Valley Forge wasn't just a ship, it was an entire air base at sea, nearly 3 football fields long, carrying more than 90 aircraft. Its radar systems could detect movement 100 miles away, and its flight deck could launch a new aircraft every 45 seconds. On board were the F9F Panthers, sleek jet fighters that could climb faster and strike harder than anything China had. Supporting them were the AD Sky Raiders, legendary ground attack aircraft capable of carrying more ordnance than a World War II B-17 bomber. Each Sky Raider could unleash rockets, bombs, and napalm with devastating precision. Escorting the carrier were destroyers like the USS Gearing and the USS Fletcher, veterans of the Pacific War, now refitted with sonar and anti-aircraft batteries. The USS Rochester, a heavy cruiser armed with 9 8-inch guns, formed the fleet's steel backbone. Together, they created a wall of firepower that no wooden invasion fleet could hope to cross. What I find fascinating is how quickly technology had shifted the balance of power. Only 5 years after World War II, warfare had entered a new era. Jet propulsion, radar networks, electronic targeting. The 7th Fleet embodied this transformation. It wasn't just defending Taiwan, it was demonstrating to the world what modern sea power could do. And as the Valley Forge's engines roared across the waves, one truth became clear. The age of wooden boats and mass assaults was over. From then on, dominance would belong to whoever controlled the skies and the seas. Next, we'll move to the other side of the strait, inside Mao's war rooms, to see how one man's invasion plan unraveled before it ever began. In the summer of 1950, deep inside Jumnanhai, Mao Zedong was convinced that history was finally within his grasp. The People's Liberation Army had conquered the mainland, and all that remained was a single island, Taiwan, where Chiang Kai-shek and his defeated nationalists were cornered like the last pieces on a collapsing chessboard. Mao's generals promised victory would be swift. Over 500,000 troops were gathering along the Fujian coast.
Thousands of wooden junks were being refitted to cross the Taiwan Strait. The final assault had a name: Operation Crossing. But what Mao didn't realize was that he was betting everything on a flawed hand. Just months earlier, at Kinmen Island, his forces had already learned a painful lesson. Poor coordination, lack of naval support, and waves that swallowed their landing boats had turned the operation into a bloodbath. 9,000 men were lost in a single night. The ocean, they discovered, was an enemy all its own. Still, Mao pressed forward until the morning reports arrived. The U.S. 7th Fleet was now patrolling the strait. The invasion routes were exposed to radar, and the skies would soon belong to American jet fighters. In an instant, the great gamble collapsed. The invasion was called off. The dream of liberating Taiwan was postponed indefinitely. I often wonder how Mao felt that night. For a leader who had never faced defeat on the battlefield, being outmaneuvered without a single shot fired must have been infuriating. Yet, in a strange way, Washington's intervention saved him. If the invasion had gone forward, it would likely have ended in catastrophe, thousands more lost to airstrikes and artillery. Instead, Mao turned the setback into propaganda, declaring that American imperialism had stolen China's victory. It was a brilliant political move, transforming a military failure into a moral crusade. But beneath the slogans, one truth remained. The People's Liberation Army was not yet a blue water force. The dream of crossing the strait would have to wait for another generation. And while Mao looked for reasons to regroup, across the sea, Chiang Kai-shek was doing something far more important: rebuilding his army under the shield of the 7th Fleet. In the next part, we'll see how that uneasy peace froze into one of the most dangerous standoffs the modern world has ever known. After the summer of 1950, the guns fell silent, but the war never truly ended. The Taiwan Strait became a scar on the map, a frozen line separating two Chinas that both claimed to be the real one. On one side, Mao's newly founded People's Republic rebuilt its armies, vowing that one day the island will return. On the other, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists dug in behind American protection, turning Taiwan into a fortress of survival. What had begun as a civil war was now a global front line of the Cold War. President Truman's decision to neutralize the strait didn't bring peace. It created a balance of fear. For the next decade, American carriers patrolled the waters like silent guardians, while Chinese artillery thundered across the waves during the Kinmen and Matsu crises of the mid-1950s. Millions of shells were fired, yet the front never moved an inch. The world began calling it the Invisible War, a standoff where every flare and radar ping could ignite catastrophe. What fascinates me is how this uneasy stalemate reshaped Asia. It gave Taiwan time to rebuild, to reform, to transform from a refuge into a democracy. But it also gave Beijing a reason to modernize, to dream of a navy that could someday challenge American sea power. In that sense, both sides were forged in the same fire of confrontation. And here's the part we often forget. That frozen line from 1950 still defines the modern Pacific. The U.S.-Taiwan Defense Treaty of 1954, its cancellation in 1979, and the Taiwan Relations Act that followed all trace back to those first tense patrols of the 7th Fleet. Even the missile crisis of 1996, when American carriers once again sailed into the strait, was an echo of Truman's original order. When I look at today's news, jet fighters circling, destroyers shadowing each other across narrow waters, I can't help but think the past never truly left us. The Taiwan Strait remains what it has always been, a line drawn in salt water, fragile yet unbroken, holding the weight of history on its waves. And in our final part, we'll look at the enduring lesson behind it all, how one decision made 75 years ago still shapes every move in the Pacific chessboard today. 75 years have passed since President Truman gave the order that sent the 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait, yet the ripples of that decision still shape the Pacific. Every carrier patrol, every freedom of navigation operation, every tense radio exchange between American and Chinese warships can trace its roots back to that summer of 1950. Truman didn't just send ships, he sent a message: presence prevents war. What's remarkable is how timeless that logic remains. Deterrence is not about pulling the trigger, it's about convincing your adversary that you're ready to. The 7th Fleet, standing between two hostile shores, embodied that idea better than any speech or treaty ever could. And that lesson, that the quiet shadow of power can be louder than war itself, is what still defines the Pacific balance today. When I look at the modern Indo-Pacific, carrier groups rotating through Yokosuka, submarines lurking in the Philippine Sea, and stealth bombers flying out of Guam, I see echoes of Truman's map. The technology has evolved beyond imagination: hypersonic missiles, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare. But the principle is the same: strength, seen clearly, keeps the peace. Personally, I think Truman's real genius wasn't just in reacting to a crisis, it was in understanding time. He knew that America's presence would buy Asia decades to rebuild, to grow, to choose its future. Without that decision, the Pacific might look very different today. And that's the lasting paradox of deterrence. Its success is invisible. The wars that don't happen, the invasions that never come, those are its victories. Truman's order in 1950 wasn't a show of aggression, it was a declaration of responsibility. A reminder that leadership means standing watch, even when the world would rather sleep. So as destroyers and drones still dance across that same stretch of water, I find myself wondering, what would Truman think if he could see the Pacific now? Perhaps he would nod quietly, knowing his fleet is still there, still watching, still keeping the line unbroken. If you've stayed with me to this point, thank you. History isn't just the past, it's the compass that guides our choices today. If you love stories that connect strategy, courage, and the unseen forces that keep peace alive, give this video a like, hit subscribe, and share it. Your support helps bring these forgotten moments back to life, because sometimes the calmest seas hide the greatest lessons.